Hi everyone, my name's Surj and welcome again to our podcast. Firstly, the big change is that Dimitri isn't here this evening. He's on a train somewhere doing something very important, but we wish him the best. I'm definitely not freaking out about doing the introduction. Now it shows how much I suck that he's not here. Anyway, so we're joined tonight by one of my bestest friends and by one of the legends, that is James Putnam, who is a physiotherapist for the NHL. So why don't you introduce yourself, James?
Oh, you've done such a great job of that already.
I know. I was like, do you know what? I was freaking out about it so much because Dimitri does it so well. But it sucks that he's not here. But James, over to you.
Hey guys, I'm James. I'm a physiotherapist in the NHS. I don't know, I've seen some of these episodes. I don't know how long of an intro you want, but I've been doing it for about best part of 10 years. Qualified in 2012, turning 30 this year. I'm sure that'll come up in a podcast around mental health at some point. Yeah, those are the main things. I know you from St Paul's, obviously, in Hammersmith.
Yes. You were the first person I spoke to.
I'd say we go back. We don't go way back yet, but we go back enough. Like
you were the first person I spoke to, and like you promised that we have a FIFA tournament, which is probably a good thing. It actually hasn't happened because you beat me.
I thought I delivered on that and you weren't there, but yeah, potentially.
I can't believe I missed it.
Yeah, and and I know you well enough to know that you know some of my skeletons and I know some of yours in the closet, so that's good. We have some leverage on one another.
Is it the time where you beat me 4-1? Like that is a big. No. There was the night we played pool and you completely smashed me, and I was really.
That was a great day.
I was really disappointed because like you beat me at most things, but like that evening I was super excited because I was like, this is actually one thing I'm quite good at, and you just like killed it. It was really.
I love sports. That's the other thing I can put in my intro. I love sports, but I play to your strengths. I know you're a go-karter and an F1 expert. If I steer clear of those things, I fancy my chances against you.
We both support the best. We both support the best football. Well, apparently the best football team, Arsenal, though. So that's our connecting point.
Yeah, nice.
I mean, and you never know with Arsenal because at the time of recording this episode, we're actually doing all right. But by the time like this episode goes out, we might be out of the Europa League. So it's just like.
I think we've done well if this Arsenal chat even makes the final cut of this anyway. So
yeah, no, I think we should like record two different like sections and just be like you know, we're gonna win. But yeah, anyway, but James, how are you? How has lockdown been for you? Oh, actually, maybe I should firstly just give a bit of background to this episode. So which is probably what Dimitri would do, my bad. So like what we decided we were going to talk about today is like obviously mental health is such a big subject, but obviously today's episode title is putting the men back in mental health, and you know, men and mental health is like a really big subject. It's something that we don't talk about a lot. You know, me and James have spoken about this, you know, at the pub and like hanging out, and it's actually, you know, how do we approach that? But you know, firstly, James, just how has like lockdown been for you? Like, how have you coped? What's been going on? Highlights, not highlights? You know, to tell us what's going on.
Yeah, it's going okay is the answer that everyone gives, right? And then there's always like a massive story behind it, like general context. But yeah, at the minute it feels okay. There's obviously I won't say which, but I work in one of the bigger hospitals in London. That's just it. I think that's more to do with like one of their policies that they have that I'm not allowed to mention it or something, not trying to be like super mysterious.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of COVID patients, and obviously that's been a big thing, and most of our team were redeployed. So my work is normally in a rehab gym. So I would rehab people that were kind of injured, in pain, and usually with exercises and workouts. That obviously changed quite a lot. So there was a lot of people moving to the wards, which if you know me at all at work, you'll know that's not my preference, nor my forte. But yeah, it's I think I've been pretty lucky with it really, because there were a couple of mini shifts on some of the more intensive care units, but as a whole, I was just sort of backing up some of the other medical wards, so not the really sick people. I think some of my colleagues, physio, nurse, doctors and other, have had it a lot worse and been on the front lines. I kind of think of myself as being a few lines back in the trenches, which I'm quite fortunate about. So from a COVID perspective, being on the front line, I haven't really felt that badly affected, which is great. But obviously a shout out to all of my colleagues that have been there and just sort of like really battling and digging in. Yeah, it's been a weird one. Just I think the normal challenges everyone gets is, you know, I'm on some annual leave at the minute, so it's just knowing what to do and how to spend your time, which is probably one of the big challenges I've had recently. So it's been kind in many ways, in that I've probably not had like some of the heat that some of my colleagues have had. I think being in London, there's still stuff to do. There are still people around that you can kind of go for walks with as and when. So it's been a very odd time, and one where you've had to adapt quite a lot to a number of different things. But yeah, nothing too overwhelming, nothing too.
What was
not as bad as you might believe in the headlines, maybe.
Yeah. What was that like though? I mean, you spoke like very briefly about being on those like intense wards, you know, I guess what you call the front line. Like, what was it like seeing that? You know, obviously because like we see it, I see it on the news every day, you know, the Sky News notification, it comes up every day. But what was it actually like being there?
I think the two things that stand out for me were, I mean, it was brutal for the people that were there day in, day out. Absolutely no doubt about that. I think if you work for the NHS, after a while, you develop a thick skin to certain things, even this, because if you stop sometimes for a minute, I think it could just become an impossible task to keep functioning under that kind of stress and what people have seen. Me personally, I kind of I'm quite good at putting up that thick skin so that I don't sort of tend to get affected by things at the time necessarily. But I guess the bigger challenge for me is then being able to take it off at the end of the day and just to process stuff a bit better, which is definitely something I'm learning to do better. I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit more. But I think the other thing that came out of it for me, again, I don't want to sort of talk about it too much. I wasn't really there for a lot of it. I was kind of a bit more protected.
Exactly.
I've done for the majority of the last year. I've probably still done my normal job, but it's been albeit on a computer and doing video consultations more like this, which has been probably in some ways a bit more stressful for me, just because I'm learning how to do what I know a bit differently. But the other thing is I just remember sort of thinking in the first month or two after the first wave that I hadn't really felt prouder to work for the NHS. It's kind of been my employer for a long time, but I've not particularly had much of affection to it. You know, they pay my salary, that pays my taxes, and then also for pub drinks and pool games. So that's as far as my relationship.
No more pool games.
Yeah. Well, not with you anyway. It was tricky at times. Yeah, there were certainly very dark days, but I consider myself quite lucky that I've come away quite unscathed. I've not really had a lot of trauma to sort of witness, hear, or process in the grand scheme of things, and all my family are well, obviously. I think it was a day at the time of recording. I think it was yesterday. It was a year to the day since. Oh no, it was today.
So crazy.
Maybe today, yesterday, a year to the day since we went into the national lockdown, and who thought we'd be in this position.
It's so crazy, right? It just happened. Like I remember, I was racing in I had a race in Sandown Park. Like I was karting, and we started the weekend, and like COVID just wasn't a thing. And then like coming back was like, this might be a thing. And then when they announced the lockdown, it was just like crazy. I can't believe like it's been a year, and it's some people being like, oh yeah, this is the new normal. None of this feels normal. And like if you're out there and think this isn't like, you think this isn't normal, like you're right. Like still like I'm still like totally like taken aback by like how weird this is all is. It's still like bizarre, like, you know, to see places and like streets so empty, you know.
Definitely. I think one of the other kind of mini blessings in a way of working in a hospital is if I can say it, is that it's been quite normal. Like I've been going to the same workplace around the same people for the last year, which has been, albeit harrowing. The context that people find themselves in at the hospital was quite harrowing. A lot of the time it was quite a nice blessing to still have that normality and being able to leave the house every day. And so that's been probably quite a good positive. I think that's definitely quite a good positive to keep me here, just about head above water, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that's so cool, man. That's so cool. Like, and obviously, you know, like I definitely, you know, just wrapping this up, like I feel like, you know, definitely taking our National Health Service, like, you know, actually I hold it in so much more of a higher regard. You know, I know my friend Arthur was telling me he's just come back from Brazil and basically COVID doesn't exist there. So, you know, we're really, really lucky to be in a country actually where we have like the best people, you know, working on this. And, you know, that's like really, really exciting. But you mentioned earlier about having tough skin and thick skin, like us guys too. And I guess, you know, obviously this is a podcast about mental health. Like why? So I guess the question we're trying to tackle and something like we want to talk about today, and something we're planning to talk about, is like, why do you think, like, as a man, and you know, like I think we're similar. I think you're like a year older than me. Like I think we're like a similar age. Like why is it that we actually struggle? And we've spoken about this, but like why is it that we struggle to talk about our mental health? So like why is it when we are feeling crap or we're not feeling great about something or we have anxiety about something, like what makes it about us, do you think, that doesn't make us want to talk about it?
It's an interesting question. Where to start? I don't know if it's necessarily a case of we don't want to. I think a lot of the time it's probably more a case of we don't know how to, but I think most blokes, I know everyone's brain will work differently, but mine is very much a brain that likes to understand as much as possible, to kind of understand and process things in a very logical way. Because like almost like within, you know, if the world around me falls within a framework that I can kind of understand, then I feel a lot more comfortable in that space. So quite often when I'm more stressed or when I'm more under the weather or just not feeling quite right, is probably when the world doesn't seem to fit into that. Or so in answer to your question, I think the first point would be, it's not necessarily that guys don't want to. It's probably more, there probably is a bit of the stereotype, to contradict myself. There probably is a little bit of a stereotype in blokes that, you know, don't necessarily want to sort of talk about things. They'd rather process it. I can probably only speak from my own perspective, but you know, there are some times when it's not advantageous, where talking about it is, you know, you're going to put yourself in a very vulnerable place. And I think blokes can be particularly averse to putting themselves in vulnerable positions, because it's being out of control. It's having things feel outside of that framework, and things don't feel like you've got on top of things, and then you sort of feel like you have to react, and you know, that can be a little bit trickier to understand and process. But I think a lot of it maybe probably goes down to, as well as going through, I've probably had to kind of go through a bit of a process, and I'm still doing it. Like I don't have any badges on this, of learning to understand, you know, the phrase is getting in touch with yourself a little bit, which you know, kind of learning to kind of understand your emotions a bit better is probably a nicer way of putting that. And you know, so when, you know, I used to, 5 years ago, if you asked me how I'm feeling, you know, if I was honest, I'd say I'm just really angry, but I don't really know why. So you have you know, I'd have like a root emotion, and that was all I was able to kind of decipher and process and understand. But then you sort of start to, when you start to dig into it, and obviously I've kind of spoken with you that I've sort of done this with a professional, with kind of like a counsellor over the last year or two, and I know we're going to kind of come on to that in a little bit, but whether it's with somebody else or by yourself, having a way of being able to kind of understand and process that a bit further, and just talk it through with yourself or with somebody else, has been quite a useful tool to kind of understand where that root emotion maybe comes from, and and that opens up a whole world of kind of going into your past. And the way I look at it sometimes is kind of like what I've been doing is kind of my brain is a product of everything that's gone before me, and all the events and things that I've gone through, traumas, triumphs, and everything in between. And it's interesting how things from your past what I've found anyway, is that it's interesting how things from your past can kind of trigger off things that go now, like, integrated behavior, that kind of thing, and automatic reaction to certain things. Why do I do that thing that I know isn't conducive to positive, isn't conducive to, or isn't a particularly a good decision or something I should want to do, but I kind of go back to that sort of behavior pattern, and it's kind of driven through stress or whatever. So I probably just went on a massive tangent. I didn't answer your question, but
good. No,
I think
sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, the summary points would probably be we probably don't know how to do it very well, because we also don't really understand kind of what's necessarily going on, and that's stressful in itself, so that can kind of elevate an already pre-existing stress. And B, or two, is just sometimes being not being vulnerable, especially as a guy, is not a nice place to be.
I think we, maybe it's the way God created us. I like maybe it's not, but like I think for me, I've been thinking about this a lot this year. I was actually like, we're really bad communicators. I mean, like our friendship, for instance, I think you would agree that it probably took us about 2 years to have a proper conversation. I remember, I think we went to a pub in Hammersmith, and we actually sat down, and you were like, tell me everything. That's the first time like actually kind of like we removed a barrier, but it took us like, not because like we didn't like each other or anything, but like it was like we were like intentional about, we're going to use this time to be like, we're actually going to be like honest with each other. And then like our friendship has suddenly become 10 times more rewarding than it was before, because we've actually like crossed that barrier. But I find though, like with a lot of people, with a lot of guys I know, I find that really difficult to cross that barrier. And I think for me personally, I think like a good example would be my relationship with my dad, like which has been like so like up and down, and it's just like something I'm only realizing it's something that I've really struggled with is like male authority. And so I worked for a church in Chiswick, and there was a lot of strong male leadership. And I think the reason I found it so hard is because I still wasn't processing the relationship I had with my father. So any other male coming in and trying to be a father figure, I found that really off-putting. And then I went to St. Paul's House and worked with this woman called Candace, and it was just a complete like change, working for a woman and like working, it was just completely changed. And I think I discovered, I was like, actually, this is something we have to address. And it's like, I think it's like you're saying, is like, don't leave yourself in the dark. And it's like, actually, because there are guys and there are people out there to like communicate with, and this time can be, we don't feel like you just have to shut up and like be silent, because that's just simply not the case. And I guess that leads nicely into counseling. And we've both going, I mean, I'm currently having counseling once a week, and since having being diagnosed with anxiety. But like you've had counseling as well at some points, and like what's that been like, dude? Like actually sitting down with someone and actually being like, hey, this is what's going on, how have you found it?
I mean, it's been great. Before I quickly answer that, I think that's probably a really key point. If anyone's listening and sort of like whether they've been umming and ahhing about doing anything like this, I think it's great to talk to somebody. But I think one of the other reasons why it's very difficult for guys potentially, or not just guys in isolation, but perhaps just more so for guys, certainly being a guy and understanding it this way, is I think you have to have somebody that you trust if you're going to start talking and opening up. And I don't think there is any way that you can that trust will only come naturally with time, and that builds up. Like you said, it took probably us 2 to 3 years, probably even longer, to have a a fairly brutally honest conversation like I think the one you're referring to.
Yeah.
But it's, it's great. I think it's kind of conversations, that's the sort of stuff that builds friendship, relationships in general with family, friends, colleagues, and so I think they're vital to kind of for us to develop and mature as people. In answer to come back to your last question, how what's my experience been? It's been great. Like I can't exactly remember exactly when I started this, but it's probably about 2 years ago, here or there, and it's probably been every other week since then. Certainly like once or twice a month I've kind of caught up with this older guy. I'll keep him anonymous, just out of respect, really, I think. But I'd actually been speaking with a couple of friends, and they kind of knew him and had sort of been chatting with the same person, and so he came highly recommended, so I kind of already had some inbuilt trust, and he very quickly lived up to the hype, which was really reassuring. And I'm quite happy to chat, like, as long as I know that you're not, as long as I'm not suspicious that the person I'm talking to is going to use what I say against me, and I've not really ever had that feeling, then I'm quite happy to be sort of fairly open book. Like, you ask me a question, I'll give you a fairly honest answer. I don't tend to think too much about the consequences. Probably in some ways great, probably in some ways it's maybe not the wisest thing to do all of the time, but I think for the purpose of this conversation it's probably a good quality in most places. So the experience has been really great. It's obviously with COVID it's been virtual the last year, but counselling can be quite a strong trigger word, can't it, with things like therapy or psychiatry, or we sort of talk about like psych referrals in the NHS sometimes, and I think the common perception of it is that it's mental health first aid, so that I don't think it's bad enough that I need to kind of go and talk to somebody about it. I feel like I've got it under control, and I think that's on going back to another question as well, I think that's another thing, is like quite often blokes will pride them, whether you're a Christian or not, you'll pride yourself on, or I certainly pride myself on being able to kind of keep on top of things. So like as a kid kind of growing up, not for any particular reason, I kind of just wanted to be here. Like if I can stay on this line, not necessarily going too happy, but more avoiding like the real down low points, then I was quite happy, and that was me being successful. Whether it meant, I think, a lot of that meant sort of repressing a lot of stress or emotion as a younger kid, teenager. And that's one of the things that's probably come up a little bit in some of our sessions with this counsellor. But I think what it's really offered me the opportunity for me to do is to kind of explore some of that background. It doesn't start there necessarily. They don't just get a pad and say, right, start with childhood. It was a very informal, and they're quite adaptable. So they're able to sort of go along with what you want to talk about and kind of react to what your information that you're giving. And so to have somebody that's good like that, quite a highly skilled interviewer in some ways, has been really good. What else? I think that the general finding and the general thing that it's offered me, so in the way I've looked at this process, if you like, of going through counselling, is just to how would I word it? The ability to kind of look through, I guess I'd say it as a bit of an investment, and this probably sounds a bit corny, but the reason I started going into it was probably about maybe I won't give the time frame. There were, over the years, there's probably been a couple of triggers for me feeling a bit more stressed out and being, I've kind of had more, I think the last few years, I've probably had more episodes of longer period or sustained lower moods. I probably wouldn't go as far as sort of calling it depression, because I'm not a professional, but certainly depressive episodes perhaps, where I've had real sort of strong sense of low mood, which might last days or weeks on end. not really kind of wanting to engage with anything like kind of go out, socialize, having quite a low sense of self-worth at times, like just sort of feeling a little bit like dirt, not necessarily because of anything anyone had done to me, but maybe the way that I interpreted things. I think things, when you're feeling in a low mood already, things that are then perceived as quite negative, like whether it's like not being able to kind of hang out with friends, or being having to cancel plans, that often can sort of the sort of maybe like the disappointment or the frustration of that can sometimes be magnified. So I was having quite a lot of periods like that, and then there was just quite a lot of high stress periods as well, that manifested in some interesting ways, shall we say, without getting too detailed. So those were kind of like the warning signs, shall we say, that kind of made me realise that maybe this wasn't entirely normal. And so that's kind of what got me started on this. And then so basically counselling in short has allowed me to do is to start exploring why those sorts of things were happening, like the more acute side of those presentations. You can sound, I'm clearly sound like a clinician, you can tell, because I use words like presentation. But
it's good.
History of presenting complaint. So yeah, all of that, it's kind of allowed me to sort of look into that, and then as things have advanced, it's kind of allowed us to go back a little bit further and dig into why things were like that. But I'd say 90% of it is me just talking at the guy or to the guy, and then seeking some helpful feedback. So yeah, long answer to your
question. No, that's really good. I think the thing with counselling as well, I was thinking about this today. I think it's wrong.
Also, can you give me some of your experiences as well? Like you said, maybe that would be good.
Like counselling. So when I was diagnosed with anxiety back in September 2018, and it was like so obviously I don't know if we had really had a proper conversation at that point, but I got to a point where I was like, I'm feeling like this, and I'm feeling like I want to do certain things to myself. Like, what can you do? And the doctor basically, here are some drugs, goodbye. And because of that, and then just due to a number of factors, I ended up in hospital. And then after that, I was like, I can't fix this with a medicine. I need to. I think I need to talk to someone. And I'm not. With I guess with an NHS professional sitting in front of me, like the thing with medication, it's like my parents were always against medication, but then I think there's times when medication can help. But I think it's a bit like counselling as well. I don't think it's necessarily a fix, but it can definitely like sustain. So definitely I think just finding that line. I'm not saying medication is wrong, but I think, don't take it lightly. Think about what you're putting into your body, and like and I think but so I waited 2.5 years after that. I got a new doctor as well, which is like a real blessing from God. And I think because she was a woman as well, that really, really helped. So she was like a big sister, and it was like, let's find someone, and obviously because I'm Asperger's, the first thing I really wanted to see was an Asperger's specialist, because I think obviously like the way I approach a situation, I know it's like kind of different to a normal person would. So I finally got one, and it was like last year, and I went when I think it was like around September last year. I started seeing this person, and I remember going to the initial meeting, and you meet the person who's the head of the organization, and she assigned someone to you to talk to. And I said, and I really prayed about it, and I said, I have a really weird request, and I hope you don't think it's weird. And she said, what is it? And I said, I hope it's okay, and I hope it's not weird I request this, but I'd really like to talk to a woman. And she was like, she goes, no, that totally makes sense. And like just taking that step of faith, I know if I had done that journey with a guy, like with a man, like I'd have found that a lot more difficult. But actually just don't just go along to counseling. Make sure you're like, take advantage of the system and take advantage of the fact, be as comfortable as you can. So is it, if you prefer to talk to a man or we prefer to talk to a woman, or like a particular age, like ask those questions. Don't just go along, like really try and make yourself as comfortable as possible, because you're talking about really heavy stuff. And it's like James was saying, it wasn't the first couple of weeks was like, talk to me about your childhood or talk to me about this. I remember the first 2 weeks was generally just me talking, and it was like she literally said, for the first 2 weeks I just want you to tell me what's going on. And at that time I'd just come out of a relationship. I was a lot of things were going on, like space between us wasn't at that point, was going through a rough patch, and and there was a whole other contributing factor. And after 2 weeks she was like, I know what the issue is. And I was like, great, somebody knows what the issue is. And it was just like, and she turned around and she said, oh, you just don't know who you are. And that just like wrecked me. And I like went to sleep like so like upset, because like, she's right. But in the last year we've kind of just been building up this trust and like building up this relationship but between us, where it's like, actually, and from that relationship I really like know who I am. And that's just been like such a blessing. And it's not only like improved myself, but it's like improved myself with my relationships. My relationships with other people are like, I think definitely my relationship with like John and James and like my guy friends are so much better now, and that which is like really 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 cool. So I definitely recommend. But I think what I was going to say earlier, I think counseling is like, sometimes we can see it as a fix, and it's not. But counseling is actually an opportunity to sustain, and actually it's a bit like the greenhouse effect. So like, I think in a greenhouse doesn't make the plants in the greenhouse grow, but it creates an atmosphere where plants can grow. And I think what counseling does, it creates a situation where you can actually look at yourself from a distance and look at yourself up close and say, how do I grow? So definitely. And counseling doesn't necessarily have to be with someone. I'd always recommend, I don't know, maybe James would say different, but like, I reckon it's always good to try and find a professional. There's plenty like spiritual, non-spiritual counselors. I think it's really good to actually take that time. And I think there's a lot of shame attached to it, and I think there's this stigma attached to it. But like, putting yourself first and putting your spiritual health and your mental health first is like one of the most important decisions you can make, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that final statement.
Yeah.
I think firstly we should probably say, for the record, although I'm sure there's no one's really that cynical, we're not this isn't like we're not being paid or endorsed by any particular counsellors. But there are other counsellors available, I think is what you have to say if you present it. But like, if you're thinking about it, I can't really sort of recommend the process highly enough.
I think it's important to say
you have to just be ready for it, though. There's no point, if you if you're that person that is considering it, or if you're a friend or somebody close to somebody else who's considering it, is sometimes tough love works. But I think ultimately, to get the most out of the experience, I think the individual that it's maybe going to be for needs to be ready and take that step for themselves.
No, I knew someone who was taking driving lessons, and she went through, I won't say who it is, but she went through about 5 or 6 different instructors, and so she was like, I just can't find an instructor that's good enough for me, and I can't find an instructor who can teach me how to drive. And then so the story was, she ran out with her mum, and her mum was like, okay, show me what you've learned so far. And they went for a car journey, and at the end of the car journey, the mum just turned around and goes, it's not the constructors, it's not the constructors, it's not the thinking Formula One, it's not the instructor, it's the you're just a really bad driver, and you need to work on yourself. And I think sometimes that's with counseling. Don't just go in and expect to come out a new person. It doesn't work like that. For example, for me, it's taken me a year to get to a point to say that I'm okay. And when I say I'm okay, it doesn't mean like I'm amazing, I'm on top of the world, like the world is my oyster. Like, I've got to a point where I can honestly say I'm okay. And there's, instead of like I think my problem was I tried to like deal. It was like I think it's maybe the racing mentality as well, but I was either winning or I wasn't. But actually I found this place in the middle where it's okay. And I think, that's, a lot more rewarding. So, if you are going to choose to go to counseling, as well, like be prepared to do the work, I remember like I sat with a cam specialist when I was 13 and 14, and this is like a really bad example, but I literally just lied my way to get out of it. I was like, I'm just going to tell him what he wants to hear, and then he'll let me go. And that's like possibly like one of the worst things you can do. So with that in mind, I think we've touched on it briefly, but how, so like with what we've been talking about, how does that fit alongside your faith though? And I think that's a big thing. It's like, obviously we have this perception of Jesus, and like Jesus is perfect, but like how does that fit alongside our faith story, dealing with what we've both been dealing with?
I think it falls hand in hand, but I certainly don't have. I could think of an answer that would make me sound like the model Christian, but I think anybody watching or listening would smell the beer a mile off.
Exactly.
I think for me, like if to be completely candid, I think not particularly for any reason, but my faith life hasn't been particularly great the last year. I ended up moving away from the church that I was originally at, and I want to just make it clear that it wasn't necessarily because there was. I'm not going to go into the details of what or why, obviously, but like I certainly don't want the inference to be that the church was a major, was in any way a contributor to my poor mental health. So let's just make that clear from the offset. But I think I certainly, I think so. Since I've kind of left that church, we obviously went into lockdown pretty quickly after that, and then it's been probably, let's say, quite a challenge to then sort of not be in church, but find a church and find a home and a base. So I'm kind of I've sort of been not sort of skipping through churches, but sort of trying to. It's difficult or challenging to find a church and then find a new, like say, base or family that you can kind of have, or a community that can kind of help to sort of surround you or to sort of feed and or nourish that spiritual health. Because I think if you try and do it on your own, which is kind of how things have panned out probably for me in a number of ways, albeit I've been quite fortunate in that I've been very lucky to kind of know people and have people that I can kind of get in touch with if I needed any kind of like spiritual guidance or advice. So I guess tip number one would be, we're not necessarily talking about tips, are we? But I think if you know somebody, if you're a part of the community in church, that's great.
Yeah.
Continue that, tap into that as best you can. If you're not, and if also if you're not Christian, maybe you're listening to this and you're not like, this isn't just necessarily. I think it's also, we should probably have said this out at the start, but I don't think this is really just a podcast for guys who are Christians. That are going through mental health difficulties. It's a podcast for anyone, either whether you're a guy, girl, Christian, agnostic, atheist. If you like listening to some chats, then hopefully you've got something out of it so far. But I think the if you are a Christian, I think it's important to kind of have people around that you trust with your spiritual health as much as you do with your mental health. So you can kind of have those type of honest discussions. I think I probably learned, I knew this anyway, I think going into this year, but I think circumstances have made it tricky to change the status quo of, it's not particularly easy to kind of go things by yourself. Sometimes there are those dead periods where you're in the desert or in the wilderness. I think is a nice word we like to use these days, isn't it? Sometimes, mine was maybe a little bit self-inflicted, but I stand by my decisions, and I think I'm still standing. I've not become an agnostic or an atheist over the last year. Still believe in God. I think it's helped to raise some healthy questions and start probably looking more into the start asking some healthily critical questions of my faith, because I think it's good to do that.
No,
I kind of forgot the original question you asked me about faith, but I guess that's probably where I'm at the minute.
Yeah. I think it would be wrong though to like go through what we're going through, not just in our country, in the world at the moment, and not question those things. But I think what's cool about the Bible is that, you know, the Bible, I think sometimes we get a perception of the Bible when it's like we're constantly hitting it out the park every day. But I think if you actually go into the word accepts that we're going to fail. I think people fail more times in the Bible than they succeed at times, you know. And I think, you know, like I was reading, you know, the Psalms. I was going through Psalms yesterday. It's like this is written by a guy who's basically killed someone. It's basically been like, it's basically like, I think possibly, you know, has had a real moral failure, and he's written like these psalms, you know, that we're still singing in church today, you know. So I think, you know, definitely getting, I used to think, especially being in leadership as well, I think that's kind of a different topic, but I think definitely for me, I constantly felt a pressure to be someone that I just was never going to be. And I think God's okay with that. God just wants you like as you are and at the cross. And I just think, yeah, that's really honest. I think it'd be wrong if you were going through pandemic and like everything's fine. You probably need to see what's actually going on outside. So but yeah, just really quickly, James, somebody's, you know, I just coming to a close, like just 3 simple steps that, you know, if you're a guy, you're feeling low, 3 simple steps right now if you're watching, like what's your 3, these are the first 3 things that I must do.
Okay, number one, if something doesn't feel right, don't ignore it.
Yeah.
There's a number of ways that you can address it or start to look into things, and you can explore those at your own time and pace. I think it helps to talk to somebody that you trust. So maybe tip number 2 is make sure you have a network, or at least one other person that you trust with that kind of information, that you can just talk things out with. And let's see if I wrote down anything on here. What's my other one? Number 3, I think maybe for the people that maybe aren't necessarily going through something but know someone that is, don't push too hard. You can gently encourage, but let that other person make that final decision if they're going to about how they're going to deal with it. And if they choose to deal with it by not dealing with it at that point, that's okay. You don't have to jump into counselling or doing anything like that. Quite often what a guy needs, or you know, what we perhaps just need at that point is just an ally, is to kind of go, yeah, I'll back you. You know, I think I've had conversations with a few of my closer friends recently, and I've just said, yeah, I'll back your decision, whatever you choose to do. I think just knowing that you have that support was certainly good for me when I felt I had it, and I certainly felt, you know, I certainly suffered perhaps a little bit more, and I didn't feel like maybe I had that as much. So I think, what was that? Number 1, oh yeah, I mean, I can't remember. You can cut that last bit out.
For the purpose of the listener, just rewind and then replay, and then
yeah, great. Just rewind a lot. I think it was just, yeah. Oh yeah, great.
No, dude, that's so cool. That's so cool. Bless you, brother. And that's like, you know, that's amazing. And like, yeah, no, this has been so insightful. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I'm just wrapping up as well. Just a few tiny little things as well. I know a lot of people have I sent messages on the incognito box below. We are getting through them. I'm personally messaging each one. I think there are a few unread, so if at the moment you're wondering if your messages have come through or not, your messages have come through. I definitely just want to take specific time on each one. I hopefully by the time this episode goes out, they would have all been responded to. But yeah, I think that's another thing as well. You're definitely sitting at home you're watching this, you know, bless you guys for making it to episode 5. No, this is episode 5. 6. This is episode 5. We're definitely not recording this before episode 4. So, yeah, no, we're definitely like we are getting around to those. So hopefully by the time this episode is out, those will all have been read. But if not, we will get to them as soon as possible. But James, thank you so much for coming on. You absolute legend. Hopefully we can do this in person at some point soon. And Dimitri normally says something really cool here to like wrap up the episode, but I
that's okay. You can just admit you're not cool, and then we can be done with it. I lasted an hour nearly without.
Oh no, he always says spiritual mental health is spiritual. No, I don't know. He says something like mental health is spiritual. It's really bad.
Something like that. He likes to find things that rhyme and are short and snappy. So shout out.
No, your health is wealth. That's what he says. See, there you go, D.
Right.
Honestly, thank you so much for watching, guys, and stay tuned. Keep subscribed to the page, and lots more videos to come. But bless you. This has been Ignite episode 5, and see you round next time.